Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And a couple of cards using one of the new coordinating die sets. For those that aren't, and of course, again, my lighting is going to kind of blow this out. Simon Says Stamp has been releasing some coordinating wafer dies for the Stampers Anonymous Tim Holtz stamp sets. For those that have been card making for a long time, you know, Tim Holtz does not have coordinating wafer dies for stamp sets. He used to for some of them, but that was discontinued years ago, so they haven't existed. And Simon Says Stamp has partnered with Tim Holtz and has been releasing some coordinating wafer dies, some for the new releases, and then they've been going back and releasing some older ones. And that makes me happy because I've talked about this. I like having coordinating wafer dies. I'll fussy cut if I have to, you know, I'll make it work, but if the wafer dies are available, I'm here for it. So anyway, I will post a link to what they have available as of right now. There's quite a few now because this has been happening since later last year. And then, yeah, I used the Floral outline stamp set and coordinating wafer dies. The stamp set came out a couple years ago. I forget exactly when this set came out. It's large florals, you guys, large florals. So I did some very simple watercoloring with Distress Oxide inks. I think anybody can do this. It's fun and simple and easy and messy. Love it. So I'll show you guys how I made the cards. I'll have links to all the supplies in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. I very much appreciate it. It helps pay the bills and keep the channel running. And yeah, let's get right into making these cards. So this is the fabulous Floral outline stamp set. And because it is just like all of Tim's Stampers Anonymous sets, it is a red rubber on cling foam set. So I remove everything from my MISTI because the grip mat, everything gets in the way because these are thicker than photopolymer. And then I've got distress watercolor paper. Any watercolor paper would work for this. A lot of times though, if I'm specifically working with distress products, I'll usually use distress watercolor paper or heavy stock, etc., because they're just meant to work together, you know? That's the reasoning. But again, with watercoloring, specifically with Distress Oxide inks, any watercolor paper is going to work. So I've got my Distress watercolor paper, lined up a couple stamps, and I used my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper, and I'm stamping the images with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. You don't need to heat emboss these. I talk about this a lot. I like to heat emboss my images when I'm watercoloring to give them the raised edge, you know, to give me that kind of bumper pads so things don't go past the edge. However, in this case, I'm not going to worry about that. Like I said, I'm going to do messy watercolor. But I still wanted to heat emboss these because Distress Oxide inks have pigments in them, so they can a little bit obscure stamp lines. Generally, it's not an issue, unless you're applying, like, say, multiple layers, but it's just habit. Plus, using, like, heat embossing these images, it gives them that shiny finish as well from the clear embossing powder, so it just gives it that little extra something. So, after I stamped the images, I coated them all with clear embossing powder and then melted with my heat tool. Just simple. And I did everything twice because I was like, why not? And honestly, I could have done 10 times. I always say this, but I mean it. I wish I had more hours in the day. I could have done so many of these because literally they took no time. They took even less time than I thought they would to watercolor. And it was really fun and it's super easy. And I'm not kidding you guys. Anybody can do this, especially with images like this. I find, it does also depend on like what kind of images I'm using, but I find images like this very easy to do messy watercolor with because these ones are very, you know, they're sketchy and the lines overlap and, you know, it just works. It just works. So I took one of my little palettes, just a non-porous surface, and I smushed my Oxide inks onto it. I'll have them all listed with the supplies. But for the greenery, I used Twisted Citron and Mowed Lawn. And just smush them onto my little palette. And then I'm just using a watercolor brush. This one is an Altenew one. This is the size 3 round watercolor brush. Just a bit larger than what I would normally use. And off camera, you can't see it, but I have just a big jar of water. My big jar of water that I use for watercoloring. And yeah, swirl the brush in the water, swirl it in the ink, slap it on. I have barely sped this up in editing just to show. I think it took me about 15 minutes to watercolor everything. It just all came together. And because, like I said, everything was sketchy, I just slapped that color on. And it was fun and therapeutic. And I just recommend it, man. I recommend trying it. It's fun. I was very, very intimidated. However many years ago it was, I'm not sure anymore because I've put out so much content and I've been doing this for so long. But I remember being very intimidated by just watercolor in general, because it's intimidating. I totally get that. Trust me, get it. It took a lot of practice for me to just get comfortable with it. But messy watercolor especially, I was like, how do you know? How do you know where to put everything? How do you know to just go over the lines? Like how? You just start doing it and you just start playing with it. And the more comfortable you get with it, you get more comfortable with just slapping on that watercolor. I get comments from some of you guys sometimes like, you make it look so easy. It's because I get more comfortable with it. And also always remember, you guys, the magic of video editing. I can speed things up in the editing. You don't hear me muttering, although I wasn't this time. But sometimes, I'm muttering, possibly swearing, depending on what's going on and, how many things I'm dropping, whatever. But this was easy and it was fun. So for this first set, let's get back to the actual watercoloring. I used picked raspberry, mustard seed, candied apple, and carved pumpkin. I went with, pinks, oranges, yellows for the first collection and just picked flowers at random and did the same thing. I'd swirl my brush in water, swirl it in a bit of the ink, slap it on. And I had a grand old time. And these images, just adding the color to them, they're really pretty. The funny thing is, I have had this set since it was released. I forget when it, like I said in the intro, I forget when it came out. I remember purchasing it, and then it's been sitting here just, because I collect, I curate Tim Holtz products. And I have, a bunch of the stamp sets, and this one, of course, ended up in my cart. But now that I've got the coordinating wafer dies, that just kind of gave me the push I needed to finally use it. Anywho, for the second color combo, I used Shaded Lilac. That's the very light purple. Uncharted Mariner, which every time I use that one, I am reminded of what a gorgeous color that is. Wilted Violet, another favorite of mine. And then Salty Ocean for a little brighter pop of blue in there. And same thing, this color combo, I was like, love this. I was literally grabbing colors at random. I wanted one in warms and one in kind of cools. And it just made me happy. But like I said, if I'd had more time, I would have done like 30 of these. I don't even know, because they come together quite easily. So once they were dry, I used the coordinating wafer dies to die cut them out. And there's the 3 big ones, which is what I used. And there are 3 smaller dies to die cut. A few you can die cut just the individual flowers. So if you want to use just that, or to like pop those up like for extra dimension, I didn't bother using the individual dies, just the big cluster ones, and taped them into place so that those didn't shift when I ran them through my die cut machine, and then die cut everything. So then I've got a nice little stack of all of these easily watercolored and die cut florals. And then for my card bases, I'm using top folding A2 white note cards. And I'm going to line up my card bases inside my MISTI here. And I'm just going to stamp one of the floral outline images just along kind of the bottom edge of what will be the inside of the cards. And I just went with, for the first one, I'm using that Shaded Lilac color. So got that stamped, and then made sure to wipe off the excess ink there off the inside of my MISTI so I don't get it all over the back of the next card base, because if I hadn't done that, it's guaranteed I would have smeared it all over there. And then the Post-it tape was just to hold the card base in place, since I don't have my, my grip mat in there to hold anything. So I just used the Post-it tape to tape down the card base just to hold it in place. Lined up the second one exactly where the first one was. I had wiped off the stamp, and then this time I'm inking it up with the Picked Raspberry Oxide ink, stamping that onto the inside of the card. And then this time I put my grip mat back in my MISTI because now I'm going to use some clear stamps. This is the Simon Says Stamp Sunshine and Smiles stamp set. This was part of their June release. And I just grabbed a piece of black cardstock, used my anti-static powder tool on that. And then I'm going to stamp this Hello Friend sentiment from that stamp set with clear embossing ink, inking up multiple times to make sure I got everything stamped because this sentiment set has like kind of larger, a little more solid sentiment. So I want to make sure I get full coverage with the embossing ink. And then I'm coating that with Simon's gold embossing powder, tapping off the excess. And then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. So get that smooth and melted. And then once I've got that done, I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to stamp a couple more another sentiment on the insides of the card bases. It seems like I'm kind of going all over the place, but there was, again, kind of method to the madness. I needed to get the card base done because I'm going to adhere the florals directly to the card, and then I wanted to add splatter. So I stamped the sentiments on the inside using that same just Nocturne ink. And then for my heat emboss sentiments, I used my microfiber cloth to wipe off that excess anti-static powder. And then this stamp set also has coordinating wafer dies. So I used the coordinating wafer die to die get the sentiments. And then off camera, I had kind of arranged the florals on the card front to kind of give me a visual of where, what I was doing. That's another thing, magic of video editing. I will do sort of these things either off camera or more often than not. I have to edit it out because my head's in the way and you can't see what I'm doing anyway. But I'd figured out my little placement. And then I've shown this in a lot of videos. I had placed the cluster, the first one, like on the card, and then flipped it over and used a pencil to mark where the edges of the card base was. That just gave me a visual as to where to not put any foam tape so that I'm just not wasting foam tape, and also so I'm not going past the edge and have to like cut through it or anything like that. And it also makes it easier to adhere these, because sometimes, like right now, I'm just going to pop this into place, but other times I will use those pencil lines and press the card base right into it, which I'll show with this last one. So got that into place just like so. Flip that over, use my pencil to mark where the edges of the card base are. Then I'll get my this is Simon's Big Mama foam tape, so I just cut up little pieces, stuck them on here and there. So get that in place, and then I can line up the card again with those pencil lines, press it down, we're good to go. And then flip it over, trim off the excess. I ended up using one of the trimmed off like bits on the upper left corner that you can see right there of the cards, because it was kind of just a weird blank space there. And some of those pieces I cut off were big enough, so I just stuck those to the upper corners just to fill it out. And then I repeated the process on the second card. And then I'm going to add some splatter. So I'm using my Yasutomo Pale Gold watercolor again. And this is a little bit sped up in editing, but I was talking about this in like my last video or just a recent video. It's a little mesmerizing when you add water to it and you're just swirling it around with your brush. I sat here for a while doing this. Just kind of zoned out. This is also therapeutic. I don't know why. I like it. So swirled it up in there, had these card bases in my spot box, and then splattered this gold watercolor onto it. And I've talked about this stuff a few times, shown it in a few videos. It dries matte. It's different than the other golds that I will use for splatter. Again, it just depends on like my mood. But yeah, it's just pretty. So I splattered that on the backgrounds or on the card bases and let that dry. And then I ended up die cutting just some scraps of black cardstock with the same coordinating wafer die for the sentiment, and then just adhered them together. I only added one extra layer to the back of these just to give it that teensy little extra bit of dimension, because the florals are already popped up with foam tape, and then these are going to get adhered on top. So I just wanted that little smidge of extra lift. And so I adhered those together with craft tacky glue and then adhered them to the card bases, and that was it. I decided not to add any other embellishments, anything. The florals speak for themselves, you know, and they were popped up. They've got dimension. We got a bit of splatter going on, and I had fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So like I mentioned in the intro, I will link to all the supplies I used. I will also link to the selection Simon Says Stamp has so far of the coordinating wafer dies and whatnot. So I'll have that in the description box below the video for anyone who is interested. As always, thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos. I very much appreciate it, as well as like thumbs upping and commenting. It helps a ton, and I appreciate that as well. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.